we it's gonna be an interesting cast because I think we kind of have the flipped experiences with either one of these players. Let's introduce them. First map is going to be Dynasty. Top right, we do have the blue Terran, Kelazhur.
And on the bottom left on this weirdest, wildest, wackiest of maps, he's in the red. It's Trigger.
I actually feel very close to, I guess, Kelazhur. I've hung out with him quite a bit. He's always been one of the nicest, friendliest guys, you know, especially to the up-and-comer that I once was, you know. He's been in Korea multiple times when I've been there, so we've hung out. We've had some soju together and all the good stuff. I also cast him a lot when he does, when I do cast the Open Cups, because he does play there. He's lived in the Netherlands for quite some time. So I feel like very familiar with him, whereas I still feel very confident about like knowing how Trigger plays and all that good stuff, but I'm actually not as like close to the games with Trigger. I actually cast Kelazhur so often because I'll basically join in to the Open Cup and be like, oh, what match is interesting? Whenever I see Kelazhur, I always think that's going to be fun. He's a Terran player. Obviously, I got the bias, but he's also generally a fun player. He can be kind of aggressive. He can do risky things that sometimes do not pay off, but it does mean that it's fun. And so I almost always, you know, tag him like, hey, please invite me and I'll just follow you the entire time. So I have a more confidence in Kelazhur, but like I had said in the beginning, if Trigger plays up to his potential, then I do think that he is, I mean, he's like Gohan, you know, like he doesn't necessarily get to be Super Saiyan immediately right off the bat. And even if he does make it, he's not the strongest guy, but you know the potential is there, and he just has to let go. And then he'll be one of the best. So he'll be one of the best in North America, one of the best internationally. But he's not quite able to kind of control all that untapped potential and power and consistently give results with it.
What a Reaper wall, by the way. So we see Estrella, for example, go. Some Terran Protoss players go, and they just wall off the minerals, and they say, look, if I want to go take the gold base eventually, I'll just mine it out. That's fine. But he puts the pylon in such a way where he can put a cyber core on the low ground and make that happen. And by the way, Kelazhur, he tries to get a probe, not really gonna find that one. But it's kind of funny, actually. You talk about how different our experiences are, because I actually didn't try to get that probe, because for me, like, Trigger is my Protoss hookup, right? If I'm like, hey, I got a question about something that's happening, you know, I want to know why are pro level Protoss players doing this thing, or how do you feel about the maps, whatever it is. I say, hey, Trigger, like, give me the lowdown here. What's happening? And generally, he thinks a lot about the game, to the point where I've reached out to other Protoss players and said, hey, I want to go and I want to talk to people leading up to Katowice. So, like, let me prep for this a little bit. And they'll say, look, I don't feel all that great about the matchup right now, but you should talk to Trigger, because he actually thinks about the game in a really good way. He really understands things. So he's my hookup. Maybe I'm just spending too much time talking about how awesome Trigger is, and maybe this is going to be a 3-0, but for right now, we got a drop on the way coming out of Kelazhur, Robo, Blink from Trigger, and more importantly, pylon on the north side. Trigger does not want to allow Kelazhur to hold on to this gold base for all that long.
A proxy gates with the Blink opener.
With a Robo.
It's kind of neat. I mean, he's going to get so much aggression on the gold base, while maybe eventually also having the option of being aggressive in the main. With the Warp Prism, it can kind of open up the opportunity post the first engagement, I suppose. Kelazhur going for Banshees is a bit of a ploy, right? I mean, tanks are really what you want first and foremost against any type of blink pressure. And then, you know, whether it's Raven, you know, that kind of helps, but not necessarily. Vikings sometimes against the Warp Prism, Liberator, not as often. But Banshees, if they are a surprise and you are successfully defending back at home, and that is the if, I mean, they could be really devastating, because the Protoss is not only maybe not set up physically to deal with the Banshee, they're also just not paying attention. So they get blindsided pretty horribly sometimes with these Banshee builds.
The good news, at least for Trigger, is this is not just a gateway stalker blink type of timing where there's no Robo. He does have the Robo done, but he started with a Warp Prism. We're gonna have to see. Ideally, you open up, you add in a couple observers after this on the edge. For now, Stalker's getting a couple workers, but not really gonna be able to get much done. And the longer this goes, the closer we are to Blink, the closer the Banshee, or the closer the Banshee is to the other side of the map, the scarier it gets for Trigger. he's doing good damage. He's knocking SCVs down. He's not really taking a ton of damage from the tank, taking some hull damage, but nothing's dying. Problem is, again, there's no observers. Stalkers are all on the other side of the map. There's not really a good answer to this Banshee that's going to show up at his natural and his main base, whatever you want to call the goal.
Yeah, at the gold base. So SCVs are going down, yeah, but I expect to be at least a handful of probes. Shield battery in the main is kind of a bummer. Like, it's not what you want to see when it's only your first Banshee. But the natural might be a little more open. Perhaps that third will also be something that's very easy to harass with Banshees as well, just because it's really annoying to consistently have stalkers there. But the stalkers on the offensive are really getting too much damage done at this point. You know, initially it was kind of, you know, it's enough actually. It wasn't even a lot. It was enough to put Trigger into an okay position, up 8 workers. Now it's, you know, up 10 workers, a little bit better. There is still no stim on the way. There is a +1, so I don't think Kelazhur is going to go totally all in with this, but he has dedicated quite a bit to the non-mid-game units, I guess you want to say. He's not bioing, all right? He's still on these high-tech units. Now, they can deal with the stalkers, but then the stalkers are so microable, there's kind of like, you know, they could deal with that too. It depends on the execution and just further delay of the mining for Kelazhur here. Those Banshees, real letdown so far.
Yeah, I was kind of worried about it, right? But at the end of the day, Trigger handles it really nicely. I guess he saw maybe a Banshee in the middle of the map. I'm not sure, but he was well set up for it. Now, the problem is as much as we talk about everything going pretty nice for Trigger at this point, he has, it's a struggle to go dislodge this position. This is one of the reasons why we say, hey, personally, when I think about Dynasty, at least when we talk about the gold base games, I think it's a lot better for Terran than a Protoss. You can put tanks there, you can kind of handle it for the most part. But Trigger will have charge done soon, and he's going to be able to circumnavigate things and maybe make something happen. And at least he's got his third base halfway done on the other side. So yes, fourth base or gold base goes down. That's not great. Another Banshee's going to get found out here. Some damage runs away. But at least Trigger's expanding elsewhere, and he did get some value out of it. He's got charge on the way. That's the big deal. His army, the tech, the quality of his army zombie grub is just a lot better than what Kelazhur has on the map. Like, let's be real here. Zealots get on top of this. Stalkers, it's a little disjointed, but this army is just so much better than what Kelazhur has on the map.
I think Kelazhur even misclicked right there too, which is a bummer. I think he wanted to target the Immortal and Stalkers with the tanks, then he actually shot the Adepts. They didn't even splash the rest of the units. One take on the high ground was a little clever. That did add in more damage than the main army did, but that has also been cleaned up. The Banshees finally find some success. I give them a C, but it really wasn't as cool as it was supposed to be for Kelazhur, who is now a bit on the ropes. The bio is finally getting their upgrades, finally getting medevacs. That timing was very, very close to having an unprepared Terran. And then now it actually is maybe okay, because the worker supply is actually even, which is not good for Protoss, and the armor supply is even, which is, you know, even. So it just means that Kelazhur's actually somehow made his way into the lead here. That push with the tanks onto that gold base, just so damn difficult for us to deal with.
Like, in the context of this game, though, you say army supplies are equal. This is a time when the Terran wants to be pretty heavily ahead in army supply, right? You want to be 20 up and you want to be pushing. Especially as there is no third base for Kelazhur. Well, actually, I'm sorry. No, there is a third base. I lied.
Yeah, there is a third base. I think it does depend on what the composition is for the Protoss, which is that, you know, is it going into a high technology with a bunch of Colossus, Disruptors, Storm, or is it going into Mass Gateway? And right now it is Mass Gateway. So even though they both now have even upgrade, that still put a lot of preference to the bio against the current army that Trigger has. So I think it'd be different if it was like 3 Colossus and only bio on the ground. Which, speaking of, we have the Robotics Bay now on the way after the Dark Shrine. It's going to be a hard game to read for both players. You got to figure that, right? There's been so much delayed, denied mining, workers killed, judgments of armies gone poorly. You know, it can be very difficult to read. But look at this bio. The Zealots would just be, microed against the entire day, and the Stalkers do not hold up against the amount of Marauders there.
No, they don't. So Trigger's just going to sit there. He's like, I can micro a little bit. This is going to be fine. And remember, he's got the gold base on the way. +1 armor is just going to be just about done. The scary thing, by the way, I think he's waiting here. Look at these DTs, right? Eventually, the minerals on the bottom side of the wall, they mine out pretty quickly. So I think when he's waiting for the minerals to mine out a little bit, then the DTs run in. They shut down the rest of the economy. We saw Hero Marine try to use that concept to go for an all-in, which was pretty cool. Didn't work out. But eventually, there's going to be damage into Kelazhur's, his natural, into his gold base. the thing I'm a little scared of, maybe I guess the DTs aren't going to wait for that because there's a prism, is that Kelazhur has been pretty diligent in building, I can say pretty diligent in building Vikings, but he only has 2 of them, and a scan only does you so well, Zombie Grub, if there's something to go fight the DTs. This scan doesn't, it's going to run out. Yeah, it doesn't really do all that much, and now workers are going down, tanks are going to go down, it's going to get 2 of the DTs, but there's another one in the main base, and I think we might be out of scan. Nope, never mind, okay.
That could have been worse. Could have been better because it looked like he was even on to something like a charge run by, probably more so than DTs, but it looked like Kelazhur was on to this. He was almost perfectly timed, but yeah, not quite. So it could have been better, could have been a lot worse in my opinion. I think what actually could have also made this a lot worse is if this was all distracting the army and Trigger's main army had taken some advantage of that. Now that's a very dangerous thing to do, to have that army out in the field, because Kelazhur's army, like the microbility of it is so really, really good. But there was a point in which Kelazhur like lifted 3 medevacs worth of units, and then the rest of the units were going back through his natural. And if Trigger had his main army there at that point to intercept, that would have been beautiful, right? But end results could have been much worse, could have been better. Now we do have Colossus, by the way, for Trigger, so he's got that splash to help out. And with an equal upgrade situation, equal army supply, it's going to come a lot down to how good the concave is for the Terran.
Like, talk about equal upgrades, equal supply, those are important things, Zombie Grub, but Trigger's also up about 20 workers right now. This economy that at times was maybe Terran favored, maybe equal for the Terran. Now Trigger's mining a whole lot more. I'm kind of surprised not seeing try to, there we go, medevacs are going to go down. And as he tries to set up the concave, there are 2 Vikings against this number of Colossus. And you're right, it does come down to the fight, but for right now, I mean, actually, look at this Marauder count. We have 24 Marauders, 10 Marines. This army that Kelazhur has made does not die to Colossus.
No, but then with the amount of Zealots Trigger has, if it's, Widowmines don't pop off, the Zealots don't die really all that quickly to Marauders. So, you might have this fight that actually lasts a weirdly long time. But Kelazhur, once again being forced to react to harassment, has his army now just simply out of position. So the Colossus is going to take advantage of the natural choke probably, and I don't know how Kelazhur is going to wiggle his way out of this one, honestly. He's going to be in an inferior position to take the fight, and I don't think his Marauders will actually win if the Colossus are so primed like they are.
I mean, taking this fight through this choke right here just feels horrible at this point. The Colossus, yeah, against Marauders, they're not as good as against Marines, but if they were just able to sit this choke, I mean, the Terran wants to run through, certainly, but as long as the Stalkers, oh, look at that. Nice try on the force field, doesn't quite trap enough, but as long as the Stalkers zone out the Vikings, this is just not a fight Kelazhur's ever going to win. The choke is too small, the splash damage too strong, and I like that Trigger's taking advantage of this timing, and this is why apparently, I guess this is one of the reasons why apparently Hero Marine thinks this map is kind of unwinnable for Terran, unless you go for that 2-base push we saw. I don't know that I'd go that far, but Trigger is doing a great job of abusing the map state as it is right now.
Yes, he is. I really don't know what Kelazhur's thinking at this point. Maybe he's hoping his Viking count will grow large enough, because the Stalkers aren't getting great shots on the Vikings either, to be fair. Viking range, one of their best benefits. But it still seems like a losing battle, because you must figure that the Protoss is doing a lot of things behind this. So getting disruptors is certainly one of those things. The extra wave attacking through this choke with a lot of splash. Zealot run-by is getting set up. Base is being taken back at home. It does feel like a losing battle. You got to pull the trigger, but how are you going to pull the trigger versus this choke? That's absurd.
Well, you're going to try to pull trigger through the choke, I guess. Unfortunately, it's not really going to work. Even adding a 4th Colossus at the end, just, again, because of that position. But Trigger, he's going to take the first game in our series.
Yeah, and he did it in a kind of fun game. I mean, there's some question marks going every which way. It felt like it was maybe Kelazhur favored at that time in which the army had completed all of its upgrades. But to say that, well, disregarding what it takes to win with that army would be foolish. And what I mean by that is, hey, the Terran army is pretty good, but can it race across that map and find all the damage that it could without Trigger intercepting it, getting surrounds on it, buying time for those Colossus? That's a whole different question. So, Kelazhur might have had a chance there, might have gotten into a good position at some points, but Trigger really played that entire game out really well. Just a few mistakes here and there, maybe overzealous gold base, too fast of a 4th, but otherwise I liked his control over the game.
Yeah, I think that made sense. And I like the read as well. Sometimes you'll see Protoss players, they say, look, I'm going to go 4 Colossus because I don't think you build Vikings. Sure, fine. We see A lot of Korean Pro Dust players do that to Beyond quite a bit because the man just hates his Vikings. But Trigger made the decision to go to that fourth Colossus anyways, even though this was a Kelazhur that had Vikings on the field, because he was trading them enough, and also I think it was mainly because of that position he had, right? It's like, okay, yeah, you have Vikings, fine, but there's no dead airspace for you to sit them in that my stalkers can't really hit, and having that siege range, that siege damage means I am going to slowly kill you. There's not a lot you can do about it. So yeah, it was a weird game in the mid game, certainly. Trigger maybe got a little too greedy or didn't track the army well enough. But if that was a map that Hero Marine says Terran players can beat in the late game, sure. Ghost River's map too. And that is a map that if you want to get aggressive as a Terran, if you want to unlock crazy multi-prong as a Terran, this gives you many more options.
I think so. Yeah, you definitely see the conundrum of the Terran when it gets to that stage in the PvT of the last map. But then, yeah, I guess ideally Kelazhur would have been a little more active on the map and able to stop that choke from being abused. That's the ideal. It doesn't always work out that way. But yeah, we have a very different map, not the same type of abuse, and certainly some different build orders as just from the get-go that cold base isn't the complication. In the top rights are now up 1. He is Trigger for Basilisk.
On the upper left, in the blue, he's down a game, but had opportunities, certainly had chances to win the game. For our 8, it's Kelazhur.
And Kelazhur can be really good at finding those good concaves. When I think of the beautiful concaves and the ability to find them out, it's often not as simple as just my army's here and your army's there. Oh yeah, I have a beautiful concave. Usually it's some type of trap that's set up really for the Protoss. The Protoss knows the one thing they have to be fearful of is a huge surround. I think the best person for that, and I actually think of Ryung. I know I mentioned him twice, so it seems like I really like the guy. I do, he's a cool guy, but he's not necessarily a staple of the meta and a staple of the the playoffs of any region. But I do think that he is still very good at setting up those traps and those surrounds and concaves. I think Kelazhur can sometimes be right behind him as far as, one, playing a style that almost always goes to that point. He really likes his Mass Marauder. And then 2, finding those opportunities and dealing with it. So, that game looked like it worked out kind of perfectly towards the end for Trigger, got in the position with the abusive units that he wanted to, but don't take that as, this is how the series is going to go. I can almost guarantee Kelazhur is going to get the jump on Trigger in one of these games.
Yeah, and you say, well, Ryung, we don't talk about him a lot. He's not always playing in tournaments. He's not always in the meta, but he's kind of like the Lambo of Korean Terrans. If you want to talk about who sets the meta, Ryung may not play at the forefront of the meta. Mechanically, unfortunately, he's not there, even if he has some awesome games. I think back to that surround on Zest, right before Zest went in the military, GSL, he has these comebacks, but the big thing is, if you look at how, say, Maru's probably the best one. If you look at how Maru's playing, that is Ryung. That is a lot of Ryung's influence there at defining how the game goes. So I'm with you. It's like, yeah, maybe Ryung is not this player that we see everywhere, but his fingerprints are on how a certain breed of Terran plays. And I guess Kelazhur is actually from that, I've never really thought about it like that, but yeah, I guess Kelazhur is kind of from that school of thought.
He definitely shared a lot of similarities with Korean Terrans, perhaps when the regions were more distinct, I guess could be argued. Most of the time, North Americans tried to basically replicate Korea, other than the Mud Wrestle games we see, which of course are fantastic. But then if they were playing a normal game, it'd be like a replication of Korea, just honestly slightly worse. And I do remember Kelazhur kind of being there on the forefront, and then there was that very famous cool moment where he took down TY in GSL versus the World, and he kind of showed that there's a possibility of foreigners taking down Koreans at their own game. TBT. But yeah, so I think he's very good at that portion, much like a Ryung would be, or maybe Maru if he does play that style. And Kelazhur often does. And so you might be thinking, what's the other style that could be played? Well, there's these types of openers, first of all, which are actually kind of being successful. Stalkers going down, I think is fine. Kelazhur could be happy with that. But then also maybe like more of a tank-based style, where you build a decent amount of tanks, or you push with tanks. We saw a tank push earlier today. Maybe you focus on the initial drop first, as opposed to getting as many Marauders as possible. Because last game, he was on a tech-heavy composition until he started busting out 3 Marauders at a time. There wasn't this like nice lull of incoming bio. It was like boom, all the Marauders in the world as fast as I can swap to them. And it's not necessarily the same composition you might see from other Terrans. Anywho, stop focusing on the last game, focus on this one. Yeah, the Reaper Hellion opener kind of catching Trigger a little by surprise. Had enough units, just, you know, inevitable that one Stalker would get shot down. And the follow-up here from Kelazhur is a 3-1.
Yeah, Q-base 3-1-1 type. Well, I'm assuming a 3-1-1, but for right now, yeah, I guess it is just a 3-1. And how much... So, I think this is a build that works very well on, say, like a Ghost River, because the map, the rush distance is so short. But Trigger is going for something that's not a Stargate, right? He does have forgate. This is forgate blink into an aggressive Terran. And Zombie Grub, there's this idea, right? Whoever, if your two players are all inning, whoever has a couple more workers, whoever has a little bit more production, whoever is all in hits a little bit later, they're probably going to find the advantage. And in this case, well, Trigger, he's got a bunch more workers. Hellions are going to try to dive in, but they're not really going to get that many workers. Probes have to get pulled into this, but not a ton. Big deal, though, it's a scout. And that means Kelazhur can play at home. And the nice thing about this timing is certainly you'd love to move on the map with 3-1, with tanks and Marauders and Marines and whatever else you have. And those Stalkers blink on top. They say, hey, free tank. Don't mind if I do. They're going to lose a Stalker for it, but you're very happy with that trade. But Kelazhur does have the opportunity, if he's able to defend against here, to just drop a Starport, right? Move on to with 3-1-1 type of setup. Because this is a forgate out of Trigger, because the third base is a little bit slower than it might otherwise be, well, we're going to talk about options. Stim just barely completes in time.
Oh, Lord baby Jesus. And clearly the Stim did finish, because Kelazhur stimmed. So, yeah, Trigger knows. So freaking close, so freaking close. But yeah, we still don't have that Starport, and it does kind of feel like Kelazhur was hoping to do more of a 2-base all-in, actually. But it is weird when the guy does a 4-gate, not even a 3-gate that's kind of committed, but an actual 4-gate. Then it becomes, does he find the damage early on? If yes, the 4-gate snowballs. If he doesn't, then the 3-1 might be a perfect response. Trigger did find the damage. He took down that tank, and now he has so many Stalkers in the main base that he's actually even going to jump on top of 2 tanks. And that seems a little, dangerous sometimes, but he's got so many units.
Does, and man, Kelazhur's in danger. If you talk about a 3-1 very quickly, this turning into a 2-1. That barracks gets very low, it forces the fight, and now 16 SCVs are dead. Trigger, army supply lead. Going into those 2 tanks, these Stalkers are pretty low. So I think, you never know, Trigger might decide to do something crazy, but I think for this point, yeah, his stay in the main base is over, but he's gotten the damage done. Behind this, charge halfway done. 4th base, or 3rd base, just about done. And this timing that Kelazhur may want to find, we still don't have a Starport. Kelazhur has to either move on the map and just say, YOLO, this is what I have, or he's going to have to turtle back for a while, and neither of those options feel good at all.
No, they really don't. Stalkers themselves can do so well against this, what could have been like a real all-in push. Oh, nice type of the Warp Prism. That's definitely good for Kelazhur. No longer having to worry about that. But as I was saying, Stalkers could have slowed it down. They could have forced stims that wouldn't have been healed up because no medevacs, right? So that's not great. Plus charge was done, is finishing, almost inevitable. Kelazhur would have known that a dedicated medevacless push also would not have worked out against that. Not as well as he's hoping for. So, I mean, he does have on Starport. He's kind of in a weird position, though. I think we can tell that from his resources. Like, clearly his build order has been thrown off. It's a little cockeyed here. And so now he's kind of winging it. Whereas Trigger, I mean, there's always an aspect of winging it to the post-4-gate of a game. But I think it's still a little more on the tracks than what Kelazhur was planning for himself.
Yeah, you talk about maybe Kelazhur being the likes of a Korean team. Ryung is probably a good story, and I love Ryung. His run in Katowice 2-3 years ago was just incredible. But if I'm talking about what you got to do if Kelazhur wants to play like a Korean Terran, this has got to be TY, right? You build a lot of tanks, you turtle up, you let the Protoss player try to fight into you over and over again under the aegis of 6, 8, 10 siege tanks, and you make that happen. But that's not Kelazhur's what he's going to go for, right? He's got concussive shells just about done. He's medevacs, sure, fine. But Zombie Grub moving out with +1 stimmed bio when you're down in army supply against the Protoss. Unless there's a crazy fight, which I don't think Trigger's going to give it to him. Unless there's some sort of crazy fight, this feels over before it's even started.
It does. Really, really does. You know, those Zealots don't have armor. And Kelazhur is even going to have a 2 upgrade lead very soon. Cool. But 20 army supply, I mean, maybe in like one of the most ideal scenarios, get the unit tester out, maybe 1-1 does win against 20 army supply lead. But then I think you also take into account what type of unit interactions you're going to have. You know, you might have those tanks just completely cut out of the equation because Zealots jump on top of them. Or, you know, you might have the bio overstimmed and injured before the fight begins. So there's really a lot of things you have to think about. But if Kelazhur maybe scares Trigger often enough that Trigger doesn't just think that he can get away with everything, which clearly he hasn't. He didn't add on upgrades. Then maybe there's something to be said about playing a bit of a macro game, where Trigger, you know, maybe had more of the train tracks in front of him as far as that post forgate compared to Kelazhur's kind of weirdness that he had. But he still is trying to play a very tough game of reading exactly what Kelazhur's plans are. And that might include overbuilding army and not getting the upgrades and maybe losing out in a stronger late game because he figured, oh, Kelazhur's going to attack me. It's possible. It seems like that is actually kind of where it's going. Trigger prepared for the attack, as he should have, but then Kelazhur didn't do it, so Kelazhur's upgrades, they feel really important now that he didn't just run headfirst into a 25 army supply lead.
This is all true. Yeah, he's at 1-1 versus 0-0 +2 on the way. But Trigger did kind of, when he realized, okay, I'm on 4 bases, I'm fine, this is not doing a lot, I got Colossus here, I'm in a really solid spot, he went double for it. So he's going to catch up against the single eBay very quickly. Also, remember, he has Chrono, and upgrade research time, particularly on the higher upgrades, was buffed a little bit for Protoss in the last balance patch or two. So yeah, he's behind in upgrades right now. He will be behind in upgrades for a little bit longer. But he's doing what he has to do to recoup that last disadvantage that he kind of sits on. So Widow Mines are going to go down. Yeah, fighting low ground to high ground is really rough. But we talked about Kelazhur's going to have to turtle this out for a while. He's going to have to make this game last longer. Well, he's not building a lot of tanks. Tanks do keep you somewhat safe. And now with only 1 remaining, that becomes... It's a little harder for him to deal with the random run-bys at this point. And again, you talk about getting into that late game. The other big thing Trigger's got going for him, he's on double robo. He's adding in disruptors as well. He's got this Colossus deck. Kelazhur did a nice job of feinting and finding some way back into the game economically. But Trigger's the one that's actually throwing.
I do think that Trigger still has a better pace for this game. So, you know, and now the DTs are really bothering Kelazhur. 11 plus SCVs going down here as the DT's gotten to, I think, all the bases almost. But I want to emphasize that Kelazhur is kind of back down to a position where if he takes one really good fight, and that is very possible, he could absolutely still win. Rush across the map and win the game. Can he take that best fight possible? If he's out in the map, preparing a surround, knowing where the army of Trigger is coming from, yes, he absolutely could. The new aspect of dealing with the disruptors does require some, microing away. But if you get that good enough concave, if you count the shots and read into the pounce timing, which Kelazhur can do, this Terran force can win. It's got +2 attack over its opponent, and it's dodging most of the disruptor shots. I think we're on 5 disruptors. Oh, 6 actually just popped. So we're close to being able to just cycle 1 disruptor at a time without ever having no disruptor shots. And that's going to be really important as well to the upcoming engagement. Trigger, he bought so much time, he bought so many stims, and now he even feels confident chasing a little.
What you talking about Kelazhur getting that one big fight, winning the game on it? Well, first of all, he is rebuilding SCVs, but his army supply, briefly, was getting pretty big. What he needs, though, he needs a couple ghosts. And yes, ghosts are expensive, but if you're going to want to stim down those disruptors like that, you need to be able to EMP them first. So for now, he holds the high ground. It's really hard. Credit to Kelazhur. This Terran army is very hard to get aggressive in with the full army. If your army versus army, Kelazhur has the high ground, life is not happy. If that disruptor shot maybe puts a little bit of light in my truth. But in general, it's really hard for Trigger to find the high ground, which is why he's not really doing it. He's posturing. He's sending DTs in the main base in the natural. He's sending zealots into the main base in the natural. And he says, fine, Kelazhur, if you want to go and hold the high ground position, sure, I'm going to hit everywhere else. And you just cannot be there. So Trigger takes the 2-0.
Hitting everywhere with all the harassment. Also, I think you would be doing this anyway, but it was particularly impactful in this game. Baiting out stims. There are so few medevacs and so few units in the sky in general. Like, he was struggling to get enough Vikings to deal with the Colossus that that was also impacting the inevitable fight. So even if Kelazhur let all his SCVs die and said, all right, I'll just focus on the fight totally and entirely, he would have gone into a fight with like 70% health. So again, Trigger, it feels like when he gets to this mid to late game, he does, play very calmly and kind of precisely, where he can really read these engagements. He doesn't necessarily pull the trigger at a perfect engagement like I would say MaxPax does very well, but I think he does, he's very much capable of reading the type of game that's happening and the type of goal the Terran is after, and then stopping them from getting to that goal.
Zombie Grub, is Trigger going to be the new Nice in terms of, we can't say, when we're talking about Nice, right? When we're casting Nice, we can't say the word Nice because we say Nice too much.
Oh.
Are we just
as far as using the word Trigger? Nah, it's fine.
It's fine. But yeah, I'm with you. I think if Trigger survives the early game weirdness, which is why his series versus Cham was so hard to deal with, because Cham just dragged him into the weirdness as quick as possible. Trigger is a North American player, but he's not Estrella. He's not Cham. He's not one of these players where I'm like, great, the game's going wild. This is his bailiwick. He's much more like the Disc, right? You talked about this European style of Protoss that plays very standard and makes that happen. And if he doesn't get dragged into the mud, his mid to late game is really, really solid. So I'm with you.
Yeah.
On the flip side, though, Kelazhur's tried to get aggressive in different ways, and it hasn't really worked.
No, it hasn't, and I think some of the ideas are actually totally fine. Like the first game, the Banshees could have done a lot more. I think there's plenty of games, plenty of examples where the forgates stalled out and the Banshees arrive, and yeah, you're just like, okay, great. And then the second game that we just saw, if his plan was to do some type of 3-1 aggression, limited number of stalkers would not have stopped him from trying to do that and getting that type of attack going to then lead into the next thing. But I think particularly against a forgate, like I had said in the cast, it's like if you can hold on to all your units and the forgate's ineffective from the get-go, 3-1, add the starport, you still have a lot of bio units, maybe you're okay. Forgate actually does start killing all your units, it's going to snowball a little more in the Protoss's favor. So he's just either it's not working out well enough, or he is getting nipped in the bud. Kelazhur maybe going to go for some earlier aggression. I mean, he did try out on those 3 Reapers and 2 Hellions, and they got a Stalker, but maybe something... I don't know, actually. I haven't seen him do a 3 racks in a while, like a straight up 3 racks, but maybe that could be thrown out. Maybe something a little more even typical, like a Widowmine drop into pure defense, making sure to account for the Blink Stalker gateway attacks. It is all on Kelazhur to figure out what to do. He is on his last life, spawning in the bottom right of Oceanborn. It is Kelazhur.
And on the upper left, weathering everything, getting his own aggression going at the same time. He's for Basilisk. He's up to. It's Trigger.
Trigger is playing, I think up to his potential. He's not showing any of the over-eagerness as well that I think has marred some of his really good series in the past. Well, not yet anyways. We'll see if he starts to fumble in the final game, I guess. Let's Kelazhur claw his way back. But, I think it's some overly aggressive blinks or even just straight up miss micro. For some reason, Trigger was going through at least a period. I don't know if he's over it at this point. But it felt like Trigger was more often likely to miss micro in pretty bad ways than other professionals. Just some really bad Warp Prism controls, like he was getting used to new hotkeys or a new mouse or something. And he wasn't. He might have fixed that at that point. But he has sometimes fumbled the ball towards the finish line. Could still happen, but it really looks like he's playing a smart PvT.
Yeah, I think that's fair. It's funny. So Trigger went off to Europe last year. He played in ESL Masters Jönköping, and then he stayed with Rotterdam for a month. I think he stayed with Rotterdam for a month, but he stayed with the Basilisk guys for a month to practice on the EU ladder before Home Story Cup.
Mm-hmm.
And in this matchup in particular, right, you talk about how he's able to think about things. In this matchup in particular, I don't know what it was. Actually, no, I do know what it was. He was practicing with Clementon. And he went from, he's good at PvT. It's okay. He's able to make it happen to, wow. Trigger all of a sudden is killing it in this matchup. Certainly probably the best PvT in top 2 PvT in North America is probably fair because Estrella is very good, but very different in how he plays the style. But if we're talking about just standard PvT, that month in Europe, did more for Trigger than say sometimes we see players go to Korea and they train for a while and did more than sort of go into Korea most recently.
Yeah. Yeah, that was I did the same thing, obviously without intent to practice to be a good player, but I was also in Europe, you know, bridging the Jongchapeng and Home Story Cup gap in the Netherlands, and did hang out with Roddy, and Trigger and I were both little babbies when it came to the casino. So I remember that trip fondly is when we both learned how to play real life roulette. You know, 2 guesses as to who taught us how to do that.
The Zealot did.
The Zealot did, yeah. Yeah, the Zealot is tired of guarding the same gateway lane, you know. Have some fun, gets in the roulette. That's the way it goes. Depth's gonna sacrifice itself. Was it worth it for all that scouting? I mean, there's some argument to it. I don't think a second Adept would be worth it, though. Yeah, absolutely not.
Yeah, no, but being able to see exactly what Keller's was going for, getting an SCV as well, I mean, you'd like to get a couple, but getting the scouting off, I say that's actually pretty useful. And behind this, we're getting Blink Chrono, sure, but that's Trigger. He hates Stargate play in PvT. That really, if you follow Trigger's play, that really shouldn't be that much of a surprise. The question, though, is as we see this Robo on the way, is this a 2-gate Blink expand? You get a Robo anyways for observers and things like that. Does he add a 3rd gate? Does he go up to 4-gate Blink all in like we saw him do in Game 2? There are options. And, oh, look at this. Kelazhur. It's a combat shield timing.
Yeah, I don't like it. I think that Trigger has already figured out that this could be happening, as he saw the 1-1 2-1. And that doesn't guarantee it's combat shield timing, just to be super clear. But there's something that could happen there. And maybe this is a response. Maybe it was his plan from the get-go. But I do really like the Dark Shrine. Yeah. I really do. At the very least, it's a delayed starport. And unlikely to build a Raven first off when it is delayed like this.
Yeah, this starport's going to be for stuff that directly help the combat shield timing. We're talking maybe a Liberator, maybe a Viking, maybe Medevacs, just to kind of amp up the effective HP of this army just a little bit. And none of those are detectors. None of those allow you to see the DTs. And also, if you're trying to hit this really strong timing as a Terran player, you're not banking your scans as often. You're trying to hit that mule timing more and more and more. And maybe Kelazhur, who knows, maybe he holds a couple mules anyways because he knows this is an opportunity. But given how Trigger's played, this is also not really in Trigger's bailiwick. He's opened 3-gate, 4-gate Blink, aggression on with a Blink Stalkers, just very heavy Twilight tech, but not a lot of tech behind it.
DT number 1 coming on in. Absolutely no Raven, that's for sure. But there are scans, and you do want to hold on to a scan. I would say usually around 5 minutes. But it actually, Kelazhur has held on to scans even after that, which is very good, because that is something he needs. So DTs, I feel like they've already done a decent amount of damage for being 2-3 base DTs. 6 SCVs, 1 of them lives. Warp Prism still alive for that threat. Even the Stalker's now getting on the action. Missile turrets obviously forced as well, and further distraction possibly.
Yeah, you know, Zombie Grub, step 1. Save your scans. Make sure you have enough scans for when the DTs hit. Step 2, defend the DTs. Kelazhur did step 1, but still losing 10 workers. Some, I think he lost a couple Marines damage on the Marauder. This takes a lot of the wind out of this sales. It seems like Kelazhur is gonna back up out of it. The combat shield timing, not really a thing anymore. Stim's on the way. +1. Oh, he did get +1 attack very quickly. +1 armor's on the way. So at least when we talk about these Terran timings, there are avenues to macro out of them in a way that's a 19 drone roach or something for another race. May not be as easily to get out of because you're still kind of getting your way towards the mid game. It's just you're taking a pit stop. And Kelazhur's going to have to go for that. At the very least, he hasn't lost a lot of army, so this army that he's been building up for this timing does still exist, will still allow him to theoretically build that supply lead once things happen. Trigger's got his 4th base on the way already, and 7 minutes in isn't necessarily the fastest ever. Actually, pretty fast. And given the game state, it's not like Kelazhur's really going to be able to put a ton of pressure on him.
Well, 2 Medevacs are flying over on scene, so you know, that's pretty good news. I was trying to think through Kelazhur's decision-making these last 2 games as far as the build orders that he's chosen. But I guess that's less important. Let's focus on the game right now. Double drop does hit the 4th base, gets the cancel, and will be able to retreat. However, the Warp Prism is trying to do some equivalent damage, I suppose. Not quite. Friendly fire from the tank, I think, just blasted a couple of Marines, to be fair, but the War Prism goes down, and that's not an equivalent trade. Nexus was canceled, War Prism was killed, 4 Zealots died for 2 SCVs and a handful of Marines.
Yeah, it's a start, certainly for Kelazhur, making it so that we talk about whether you can grow into the game, right? How do you develop into the mid-game, into the late game? And Trigger was doing a great job of, well, defending advantage by being aggressive in this case, but defending an attack and expanding behind it and saying, okay, well, I'm just going to continue to grow in the game. Kelazhur does a great job of making sure that doesn't happen and making sure that there's no counterattack. So now Kelazhur, he's sitting here on equal army supply into a Colossus. This feels really hard, but he's going to attack into it anyways. One hardened shield goes down, but the force fields are really nice. And the big thing about this Kelazhur, he kills off a lot of the army with the force fields, and then instead of committing forward past the force fields, we saw this happen yesterday, he backs up. He says, I took a good fight. You got to attack into me even more. I'm going to have another round of warpins. I'm not going to press my luck.
Yeah. Really nicely played by Trigger, who also got a lot of damage on the Marines with the Colossus beams, and then kind of let the other work, other units do the appropriate work. Or retreat as necessary. Speaking of appropriate work, Zealots take down a tank. It's kind of what they want to do. And now the army of Kelazhur is about to be sandwiched. Kelazhur is going to, I mean, what else can he do, really? Try and take as good of a fight as possible. And with 1-1 upgrades for the majority of that fight versus 0, I guess there was some trade that happened there because of that, but not nearly enough. Trigger's surround is great. Now he at least has 1 upgrade to his name, and he does have 4 bases. Kelazhur's on 3 bases, but of course down a lot of workers. And still needing to worry about the Dark Shrine. Now apparently Dark Templar Blink is on the way too. It feels very similar to the last few games. Kelazhur has not gotten a moment of inspiration in which he is able to gun after a poorly positioned or poorly compositioned Protoss army. It just isn't happening. And then if it doesn't happen, it kind of, this is when a lot of Terrans feel like they're sort of floundering.
Dinner time. It makes sense to turn yourself into a flounder, fish dinner. That's going nowhere. Regardless, I love the Trigger, what he's doing here. That was a reach. Unfortunately, I just pulled a hammy. I can't reach it that much further anymore. But Trigger on this understanding that, yeah, he could try to attack into the Terran, but it's ocean-born. High grounds are hard. We saw how good of a job Kelazhur was doing. It seems like Trigger might try to attack anyways, but he's just got a 5th base on the way. Again, every time you take an advantage, expand again. Make it so that even if you don't win in the next 30 seconds, because he's going to try to attack on the high ground, you're going to win in 2 minutes because your economy is going to be that much better. DT's dodged the Widow Mines. This is the last time you saw that one. That's pretty fun. But 7 workers are going to go down. And by the way, Trigger also, he's got stuff in the main base, but his army's up the front. This one, though, that main army attack, not really. He's going to have to back up on that one. Although Zombie Grub, he's getting damage anywhere else.
The thing is that he doesn't have to retreat entirely. Like, there is a chance that he's not paying attention and Kelazhur's entire army gives up defending the harassment and then jumps after him. That is a concern for Protoss players. But more likely, Kelazhur is dealing with all of the harassment, doesn't have 100% of his army on the front lines, and doesn't have the bandwidth to jump on top of the Protoss army given the chance. So, Trigger, Protoss in general want to really play with that and then find any success that they can, continuing to contain the Terran. The contain didn't last super long, but it's not really a problem. I think it actually will happen again very soon, and this time will be with Disruptors as well. I would say Kelazhur actually really needs to try and make sure that doesn't happen, that he stays with some map control, but further DT and Zealot harassment will make that very difficult.
Well, man, shout out to Kelazhur, though, for sticking the shot on the Disruptor there. I was convinced he was just about to lose 10, 15 army supply. This one, though, you gotta back up against. This one doesn't feel good. Kelazhur attacking up the high ground into a small choke into a bunch of Colossus is not a great thing to do, and these 2 Zealots are shutting down Kelazhur just about 2 base economy. He has to bring his entire army back home, and that means that this upgrade timing that he might be trying to lean into, not that it feels easy, he's down 40 army supply, but at least he's got that upgrade timing. He's got the ghosts. He may be trying to lean into this. Being forced home like this, that's just not really an option. Disruptor shots force him to split away. More damage is going to happen here. And even if the Disruptors don't hit, well, that actually hits pretty nicely. 1 Disruptor will fall, and a couple Colossus went down, I think. Given the context of this game, this is probably the best fight Kelazhur could have ever asked for.
Yeah, I guess so. But this is actually going to be a 3-0 in Trigger's favor. And I got to say,